Welcome back to Environmental Ethics. I'm Tom, and today our topic is what is ethics? This short video covers what is ethics, and then the next video will talk about what is environmental ethics. When it comes to ethics, very simply, ethics is the study or concern with the distinction between right and wrong. And when we say right and wrong, we can use that kind of distinction in lots and lots of different ways. We can talk about it in practical ways, the right way to brush your teeth or the wrong way to make a sandwich or something like that. But usually we mean right and wrong in a more absolute or higher sense, right? So not just are you doing the right or wrong thing in terms of being, say, an employee or a student. It is more doing the right or wrong thing, like as a human being kind of thing, right? And when it comes to that distinction, the funny thing about ethics is that we have a pretty good sense of that, right? And so one of the things I like to do right off the bat is to just create a list, right? In terms of what kinds of things do we think are wrong or bad, and what kind of things do we think are right or good. This is pretty simple list to make. We could do this pretty quickly, right? When it comes to wrong things, stealing, murder, lying. And then when it comes to right things, helping other people, being honest. It's pretty easy to see, what kinds of things are right. We have a sense of what it is to be a good person. We have a sense of what it is to be a bad person. And we have a sense of what are the right things to do and what are the wrong things to do. Now, the trick in ethical theory is to figure out what allows us to make that list. Based on what do we put, stealing in the bad category and respecting other people's property in the good category, right? We have a sense that it is wrong to steal, but why? Why do we separate our actions in those kind of categories? We have a really good sense of how to employ an ethical sensibility, right? To be able to judge that our actions or someone else's actions or the actions of some institution or whatever are wrong or right. But when it comes to ethics or ethical theory, what we're trying to do is give a theory that will tell us based on what do we separate some actions in the good box and some actions in the bad box. And this is a very, very tricky thing to do. The easiest way to see why ethics is a difficult topic, or why this venture of ethical theory is a difficult venture, is to think about a statement. Here's a very simple statement, right? My car is red. Okay? That's my statement. My car is red. And we want to know whether or not that statement is true or false. Well, how do we do that? Easiest way is to go out and look at my car. If my car is red, then my statement was true. And if my car is gray, then my statement was false. Right? If my car is any other color except for red, my statement is false. Very, very simple. Now let me change how I'm saying that a little bit and say my car ought to be red. And now we want to know whether or not that statement, my car ought to be red, is true or false. Well, let's say we go out and we look at my car and it's red. Does that mean that it's true? Not really, right? It just means that my car aligns with that ought statement, right? That my car is the color it ought to be. But it doesn't tell us whether or not it's true or false that my car ought to be red, right? And if I went out there and I look and I saw that my car was gray, then that would just tell us that I need to either buy another car or get a paint job, right? I need to change the color of my car, right? But it doesn't tell us whether or not the original statement, my car ought to be red, is true or false, right? In order to try to figure out whether or not that is a true or good statement in some way, we'd want to know based on what are we kind of specifying this rule that my car ought to be red? Is this because it will lower my insurance rate? Is this because red cars are cool? Is this because my friends have red cars and I want to be like them? Notice that we can't just look out into the world and look at the color of my car to determine the truth of that statement. Whereas before, when we were just talking about my car is red, we could just look out there. The way to kind of think about an ethical statement, which is an ought statement, we have to think about it in a different way, right? And so let's forget about my car being red and think about something like an ethical statement. So one ought not steal, right? Similarly, if we look out in the world and a lot of people are stealing, it just means that a lot of people are doing the wrong thing. And if we look out in the world and we see that people are not stealing, it just means that they are doing the right thing, but it doesn't tell us whether or not you ought not or one ought not steal is a good statement, right? Is that the real ethical statement? Does that really tell us what we ought to be doing or not, right? Is that a good rule, right? We have to look somewhere else. We can't just look out to people's behaviors. We also can't look to laws, right? Because just because there's a law against stealing doesn't mean that that law is justified, right? Sometimes we change laws, we reject laws, we advance other laws, right? We can't really look to laws. We can't look to the way people behave, right? Where are we going to look? What are we going to do to try to figure out whether or not it's true in some sense that one ought not steal? There's a couple of different ways, right? One would be to think about the fact that stealing from people causes harm to them. This kind of moves us in the direction of one ethical theory, which is called consequentialism, right? And it deems that actions are right or wrong based on the consequences they produce. Another theory is to say that stealing is just wrong, right? Essentially, that people, anyone who kind of has kind of ill intent towards another person is morally wrong in some sense, right? That the principle of respecting people's property is just a kind of absolute principle. This is more like what we call deontology, and there's a lot more packed into this one, but we will talk about that. And deontology is the idea that it's not the consequences of our actions that determine whether or not they're right or wrong. It is the intentions or principles behind them, right? And this is kind of the paradigm of doing the right thing because it is right and for no other reason, right? So even if you could benefit a lot from stealing, you don't do it because stealing is wrong. And then the last kind of major theory that we will talk about is the idea. It would basically say that stealing is wrong because it is not a marker of human excellence, right? So when we read Aristotle in Virtue Ethics, it will not evaluate actions in and of themselves. Virtue Ethics is unique in that it evaluates character or the agent, right? So it wants to know what does a good person do, right? And the question is, well, would a good person steal, right? And the idea is that they wouldn't. That's kind of just a little bit of a introduction into what ethics is, what ethical theory is, what kinds of questions we'll be thinking about, and how we'll be kind of approaching this question. That's it for this video.